Yes, perfect. um, so this is a short paper that I've entitled No Wallflower, Constance Spry and Mid-Century Feminine Agency. So it's a short paper that was first designed as the pilot episode of a podcast series that I imagined last fall as an alternative pedagogical tool. And I think it's quite fitting in some ways that I inserted in the current context and kind of anticipated the need to rethink education remotely. So No Wallflower as a series was intended as an exploration of the lives and works of marginalized women through their contribution or involvement in the histories of arts. It was to be specifically concerned with historical figures who were or still are consistently discussed in flattening, unidimensional terms, or whose contributions have been minimized in the literature by always referring to the same aspects of their realization. As such, this podcast wished to inscribe itself in a genealogy of feminist interventions in the histories of art. So the first episode, if you will, that I'm presenting to you right now of No Wallflower is concerned with the legacy of Constance Spry, a British designer in flower, as it can be read on her English Heritage blue plaque in the building where she worked in London. So pushing past this somewhat simplistic identification, the purpose of my short intervention will be to recenter the value and relevance of her multifaceted practice as a florist, decorator, and author as inherently educational and position it as a pedagogy towards new ways of living. This dimension of her work will be discussed through her writings, which situated imagination, playfulness, and creativity as a practice of freedom for women, and reclaimed the legitimacy of aesthetic decision-making. Going beyond the idea of Spry as a domestic goddess and the kind of platitudes that saying entails, as well as the possibilities it tends to stifle, I propose to see her life's work as a radical contribution to the articulation of feminine agency in mid-century domestic spaces, while also acknowledging the differentiated sexualized structure of experience that her contributions were formed by. Spry was born in Derby, England in 1886, and although she's remembered still mostly as a flower arranger, if you will, or designer, my focus is on Spry as an author and on her writings' educational potential. So just kind of a quick background. After her college studies, she was appointed as a full-time lecturer at the Women's National Health Association in 1908, and she continued on to pursue a career in education as the principal of a continuation day school in South Hackney. And during that time, she started taking small floristry commissions for dinner tables and parties for friends and acquaintances. And eventually this side business became so successful that she resigned from the school in 1928 and went on to publish many books and also have her own flower shop, amongst many other endeavors that I will let you discover on your own. So what I'm proposing is that education has remained at the heart of her practice beyond her career in the educational system proper. So Spry's floral decorations were the opposite of the traditional stiff arrangement of her days. She was combining unusual and commonplace flowers using foliage, vegetables, and fruits. These arrangements were flowing, informal, and often asymmetric arrangements in solid blocks of color that were inspired mostly by Dutch 16th and 17th century still life. And so she treated flower arranging as an art and regarded herself mostly as an horticulturalist horticulturist, rather than a florist. And you can see on the screen, so this is from her first book on floristry in 1934. And as you can see, it's quite unconventional, even today, I think, I would argue. On the left, you have gourds with cabbage leaves that are sitting in a colander, essentially. And then the tulips on your right that are sitting in a pink shell. So in flower decoration, which is this book and many of her publications after that, Spry advocated for a holistic contemporary approach, saying, our object today should be to reveal and emphasize particular qualities or beauties in our house by using our flowers as an artist might use, emphasize qualities or beauties in our houses by using our flowers as an artist might use colors, end quote. Similarly, in a conference given to the Royal Society of Arts in 1952, she urged the audience to rethink the contents of their garden, advocating for an unconventional do-it-yourself and arguably within your own means approach that positions flowers and their arranging as the modern woman's paint box, end quote. With flowers, leaves, and growing plants, the woman of today has her artist's material, and her efforts to make pictures with these are as yet to so severely and professionally outclassed that she need be inhibited. With this reference to the figure of the artist, Spry suggests that in floral arrangements, women could find creative freedom, aesthetic pleasure, and possibly a sense of self. The reference to the figure of the artist is also significant because I think it hints at ways of being that were historically out of reach for women. And so I think in Spry's words, we find that displays of creativity within the home are conceptualized in terms of enjoyment, of olfactory and visual pleasure, and in the way that she communicates aesthetic advice about uninhibited floristry and about liberated attitudes towards homemaking, to me, she successfully escapes the traditionalism and orthodoxies of floral arts. And I think here we must not forget that the importance of gardens to the British kind of collective identity, if you will. So Spry provides an informal blueprint for creativity as a form of agency within the domestic sphere, with the idea of the home as the background against which we fashion ourselves. Spry encouraged experimentation with everyday objects and a DIY ethos, sourcing materials from the garden, hedgerows, and vegetable patches, and using kitchen vessels and baking dishes as vases. She summed it up, quote, provided the plant is beautiful, I cannot see why I should not use it for decoration just because it has the added advantage that it can also be eaten, unquote. The same uninhibited make-do approach to floral arrangements also manifested itself in her many cookbooks. During World War II, she published Come Into the Garden, Cook, in which the reader was encouraged to use their imagination and cleverness to make the most out of rationing, and encouraging them to use their resources to the fullest as an imaginative act. The suggestion of rationing as creative challenge, which is of course not to say that it did not impose greater, more dramatic challenges, reframes and redeems activities traditionally conceived as strictly feminine and treated as simple or unintellectual. Decoration, floral arrangements, and here cookery were being promoted by Spry as, as possible articulations of agency within the home. Spry was a regular Vogue correspondent, writing about floral arrangement mostly, but in 1943, in kind of the continuation of of Come Into the Garden Cook, she wrote a column, which to me is kind of emblematic of her inventive, liberated approach to the domestic sphere. So, and you can see it on the screen actually. So it's an essay that is entitled 2 Ounces of Butter a Week. And it's an essay that is written in the first person and tells Spry's own story as she navigates wartime rationing, describing unconventional possibilities to make the most of the allotted rations of butter, margarine, and lard by suggesting all sorts of quite strange maybe to us now, all sorts of concoctions, if you will. And she ends her article with what resembles kind of a script for a play that she calls a romance, Cooking for 6, starring 1 pound of margarine. And almost humorously, she describes the strategies and ingredient juggling that she has recourse to in order to prepare meals that are still somewhat interesting, despite the limitations that were imposed at the time. So of course, if you read Spry ever, you'll see that the language that she uses is very much telling of her time. But I think that if you're willing to acknowledge and see beyond the dated tone, I suggest that you will find a resolutely modern attitude towards aesthetic and the creative process, and towards the inventive possibilities to be found in the everyday. In that, Spry's writing is suggestive of new ways of living, new ways of seeing, by refusing to see the traditionally feminine activities within the home as insignificant and necessarily devoid of intentionality or of pleasure for that matter. To me, what she is suggesting is for women to reclaim the significance of their decision-making when it came to their domestic space. So I wanted to pull just a little quote from her that says, do whatever you please, be original if you want to be, and don't if you don't want to be. Just be natural and gay and lighthearted and pretty and simple and overflowing and general and baroque and bare and austere and stylized and wild and daring and conservative, and learn and learn and learn. Open your mind to every form of beauty. And I think it's quite emblematic of her approach, if you will, to life and to the home. So just kind of to wrap it up, if you do a quick search on Spry after this, you'll notice that I've left out the realizations or like the achievements, sorry, that are commonly associated with her name. And this is of course on purpose. With this decision, my hope is that you discovered a path less traveled, that of Spry's educational mission. And despite the fact that some might see her as a woman of her time, and in her choice of words that seem dated to us or downright unfortunate when she talks about what and how a woman should be and act, I still submit that her practice and teaching on traditionally feminine occupations and roles, reframed through the lens of imagination as a practice of freedom. And in that sense, Spry is, to me, resolutely modern. She encourages floristry and cooking as a practice of creativity, resourcefulness, and as such positions, reclaims and celebrates them as an intelligent, worthy forms of individual expression. I think it would be easy to dismiss her approach as frivolous or irresponsible, considering the historical context. But I urge you to consider the interesting and novel connections between her treatment of traditionally feminine activities and the reclaiming of playfulness and creativity that her writings inspire. Thank you.